Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Bennett Tyler with Aberdeen Group, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Top Talent for Your Bottom Line, How to Align Sales Hiring with Corporate Revenue Goals. The webinar today is hosted by Aberdeen Group and sponsored by GrowthPlay. During this webinar, we'll be talking about sales talent, how to attract it, how to retain it, and how to do so in a way that aligns and furthers the goals of your business. Our presenters today are Zach Chertok, Research Analyst for the Human Capital Management Practice here at Aberdeen Group, and Dan Weinfurter, CEO of GrowthPlay. If you'd like to read their full bios, please use the drop-down arrows below their photos on the right side of your screen. I encourage you all to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A field at the top left of your screen. We will facilitate a Q&A at the end of the presentation and try to address as many of your questions as possible. Also, on the left of your screen, you will see our resource section. There you'll find today's presentation deck, as well as some one-pagers, an infographic, and a video on today's subject from Aberdeen and GrowthPlay. It is now my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Zach Chertok.
Thank you, Bennett. So today's sales organizations face pressures to perform. As with most other organizational divisions, improving the performance of sales organizations depends on building best sales practices. While sales managers and directors need to push those best practices out to the field, they also need to be mindful of what top sales performers look like. Today's webinar is going to look at what is involved with the state of sales performance management while looking deeper at what can be done to improve how sales managers and directors can cultivate and build the best sales organization possible. We'll start off today by introducing you to Aberdeen's research methodology. In this section, you'll get a chance to learn more about how we here at Aberdeen arrive at our best-in-class and industry leader designations. On the content side, we'll begin by looking at how the best-in-class and industry leaders are defining top sales talent. Understanding their definitions is important to understanding how sales organizational pressures develop and what shortcomings the market for sales talent has. The section following today's top sales talent definition will be a look at the pressures that are building up behind that definition. With an understanding of those pressures, we'll then dive into what the future response will look like as the technology space changes to help organizations attract and retain top talent. Finally, we'll look at the business benefits that characterize industry leaders and the best in class. While today's industry leader characteristics are defined by the practices they're currently using, take them in the context that industry leaders have identified the pressures that they still face, and that the improved business results include a shift in their focus to look forward to the technology options they'll have for the road ahead. What this means is that they're looking ahead to address today's challenges in the same way we'll look ahead in the data. So kicking things off, let's look at how Aberdeen defines the best-in-class and industry leaders. Aberdeen routinely surveys the market across 16 different practice areas to understand trends in four main categories. The first are pressures, which are the challenges that cause organizations to think or manage differently. The second are actions, which are the strategies that organizations design and implement in response to those pressures. Third are capabilities, which are internal and external response processes that are designed along the lines of those strategies. And then fourth are enablers, which are the technology resources that end users implement in order to act on those capabilities and, again, carry out those actions. Within the HCM market, Aberdeen surveys go out to practitioners to understand the strategies they're using inside their organizations to drive improvements in key performance metrics such as revenue growth and performance optimization. When we design our surveys, we have specific outcomes in mind that are categorized according to the PACE methodology that I just described. It's this PACE framework that allows us to speak to readers in their own language, giving our content an edge as it relates to using terms that you, our readers, are likely to search. Our surveys run for an extended period of time, at which point we then tabulate and process the data. Once we've got our data set, we assign weights to the organizational KPIs that we asked about to divide the data set according to a clear definition of best-in-class, industry average, and industry laggard characteristics, with each one constituting the percent segment in the data set shown here. In the event that we have a smaller data set size, we'll break it down into two categories of leaders and followers. Best-in-class are broken down by the top 20% of performers making up the best-in-class, the middle 50% being the industry average, and then the bottom 30% being industry laggards. Throughout today's data sets, you may also see a reference to all others as a combination of the average and laggards when compared to the best in class. Our ability to associate certain capabilities and technology enablers with performance metrics helps readers understand why it makes sense for them to adopt the strategies and tactics. The data points that you're going to see today will be centered on two surveys that we here at Aberdeen ran in the fourth quarter of 2016 and the first quarter of 2017. The first survey took an aerial look at the general state of human capital management. Aberdeen asked respondents to answer questions about KPIs for their organizations, pressures, actions, capabilities, and enablers. The survey pulled back 204 respondents, whereupon the data was then organized according to our best-in-class methodology. As a side note, again, when you see a reference to all others, it's a combination of the lower 80% of respondents as compared with the top 20% making up the best-in-class. The second survey took a deeper look at the state of talent acquisition and talent and performance management. This particular survey returned 104 respondents, prompting us to then run that leader-laggard comparison, where the top 30% of performers make up the leaders and the bottom 70% roughly form the industry laggards. So with those research definitions behind us, now let's look at what characterizes today's top sales talent landscape. Today's sales talent landscape hasn't changed much in the last 5 years. Sales remains a very independent field driven more by pipeline management, quotas, and business results than by qualitative performance management and typical retention characteristics. In kind, today's sales talent is expected to deliver on a lofty expectation of a short time to profitability that delivers consistent growth in shorter and shorter time frames. Today's best-in-class companies are 21% more likely than all others to expect an average of a month to pass before employees are working at full capacity. Within best-in-class sales organizations, the percents remain the same while the timeline shortens to as little as 2 weeks. By comparison, industry leaders are looking beyond the investment salespeople make in their individual sales performance and pipelines to be considering the commitment and contributions they make to the overall organization. Today's top sales organizations are looking at the rate at which sales professionals are engaging in the workplace to develop and promote best practices. They're turning to resources in learning management, rewards management, and compensation management to understand how the sales organization is measuring up and performing. Using goals management does mean that sales managers can access performance data in real time, but the problem still remains that their current performance management style is still handicapped from proactively producing metrics or information about how sales is meeting the expectations of management. While the average organization is still looking at sales as a revenue-based commodity, industry leaders are defining top sales talent based more on performance contributions and the achievement of management goals and objectives. Measuring sales by accomplishments alone is allowing salespeople to remain fiercely independent of organizational management, while allowing managers to push alignment of corporate goals and objectives out to those siloed salespeople. The industry-leading definition of top sales talent is more based on performance contributions and the achievement of management goals and objectives than it is to the time and resources salespeople need to perform. Industry leaders are looking for an increased commitment and stronger contributions to internal development that will otherwise strengthen the ties of the sales force to the organization. In the end, this means that industry-leading expectations are focusing less on revenue per FTE and more on performance development as it leads to overall revenue growth for the organization. Relative to their expectations for what defines top sales performers, industry leaders are still missing some key process characteristics that would otherwise allow them to drive for more performance-based ideals. Currently, industry-leading performance management styles do not lend well to producing credible metrics or information with regards to performance-based expectations. Today's industry leaders are looking to rewards achievement and goals completion to understand how sales is performing. In the process, they're ignoring changes in revenue per FTE and resource commitments needed to achieve performance improvements. When it comes time to define top sales talent, industry leaders are lacking consistency behind what that definition looks and reads like because they can't map performance back to improvements in business results. Based on the data disconnect, it should come as no surprise that when it comes time to advertise for new salespeople to join the organization, industry leaders face a lack of consistency in terms of what defines top sales talent. The lack of consistency is causing longer decision timing on the part of hiring managers as they work to fit profile considerations that are constantly changing. While hard sales skills are not hard to come by, Relevant soft skills are hard to ascertain or measure against this constantly changing criteria for top performance. Furthermore, while risk is a big part of the sales organization and the hiring process, lack of consistency in top quality characteristics is presenting unnecessary risk to sales hiring managers. The results are pushing out the time to hire and reducing expectations around time to productivity once the new candidate is hired. Today's industry-leading sales organizations face a low grade of skills and qualifications passing through early vetting and talent acquisition. While these organizations have recognized the need to incorporate performance metrics into how they define sales effectiveness, measuring and driving them remain elusive challenges. In other words, while industry leaders admit that sales performance goes beyond just revenue generation, they're still working with a performance infrastructure that supports revenue-based performance measurement. Consequently, while candidates may pass through early vetting, they're doing so based on constant quantified performance comparisons and not necessarily based on whether they're a good fit for the organization. Next is the lack of consistency in defining top sales performance. Underneath this challenge is a lack of key infrastructural elements that sales managers need to contextualize their ideal of top sales performers and contributors. As they face an infrastructure built to promote sales based on revenue generation and quota performance, they need to find ways to interface with the HR organization to access performance solution and rewards, recognition, social collaboration, and predictive analytics to model performance potential inside and outside the organization. In other words, they really need to construct a sales performance solution set that provides an equitable scorecard for building the sales organization to management specifications and in accordance with emerging best practices. In the last section, we established that industry leaders are suffering from a lack of consistency in the definition of top sales performers. Today, top sales performance extends beyond just quantifiable measurable metrics such as revenue generation and exceeding the quota. Today's industry leaders want committed employees who are good matches for the growth of the organizational best practices. As we established already, while industry leaders have shifted their definitions around including qualified performance metrics, they lack the talent management infrastructure to create a sales performance framework that will lead to a consistent definition of top sales talent. Finally, industry-leading sales managers face pressure from low credibility behind that current performance data that they have. Building back to the middle data point about what it takes to build consistency into the profile of top salespeople, industry-leading sales managers recognize that their largest challenge is now coming from the base point of where their data comes from. As a top-performing organization, you can't afford to have bad data clouding how you decide to hire and drive performance. As mentioned earlier, the lack of credibility is really undermining management confidence in the definition of top sales persona, of how they're defining those personas and profiles. The lack of confidence is lengthening hiring cycles and leading to collaborative decision-making for even simple hires. The result is that the total time to work at full capacity for salespeople is longer than it realistically needs to be, or than it really could be if managers had the confidence in their top profile framework that they needed to quickly make key decisions. A lack of strong performance management for the sales organization, coupled with reactive performance measurement methods, is leading sales managers to assess the qualitative aspects of top performers reactively. To shorten things up, managers are making changes to the definition of top performance only after sales results have affected the organization. What's more is that by the time the new persona profile is generated, it takes even longer to make its way to talent acquisition in terms of the vetting criteria being used for incoming candidates. The result is that sales managers are constantly operating behind the performance 8-ball when it comes to driving qualitative top talent within the sales organization. So far we've looked at how industry leaders are changing their perception of what defines top sales talent to include more subjective and organizational performance metrics. We know that right now their infrastructure is still quota and revenue performance driven, but that they're recognizing a need for more organizational optimization and best practices contribution to be taken into account in the definition of top talent. We've taken stock of how the current sales performance resources today again are not fulfilling the promise of identifying those top performance metrics. So moving ahead, let's look at what this means for pressures on the organization itself outside of just the talent theme. Industry leaders are facing substantial pressures to develop a stronger understanding of key performance metrics with regards to their sales organizations. They report feeling all but one of the pressures shown by a higher magnitude than comparable industry laggards. The good news for the leaders is that this doesn't necessarily mean that these pressures are having a higher magnitude negative impact on the organization. Instead, it means that leaders are more likely to have access to resources that are indicating that these pressures are significant and that they present real problems that need to be resolved. Some of them we've already talked about in the context of establishing a credible salesperson profile with respect to what industry leaders are currently expecting. Included in that list is a lack of credible performance data that can be linked to a solid talent brand, a lengthy time to hire, low-quality talent per management's definition of top talent, and a low grade of skills passing through early vetting. When we map these back to the organization, a lack of clarity around management goals and objectives for sales joins the mix along with a lack of connection between performance and labor time spend. When we look at how industry leaders define top sales talent, this really shouldn't come as a surprise that they lack a connection between resource requirements to drive top talent and what top talent performance looks like, since they're currently increasing their concern for top performance metrics while decreasing their concern about what resources it takes to achieve that same top performance. The reality is that to drive credible growth, organizations need to bring these two measures together to ensure that performance enhancements are not being outpaced by wider resource consumption and time lost to unproductive tasks or immaterial accounts. In other words, they need to account for non-revenue-based activities on the part of sales when they're defining top talent, but they need to ensure that those activities aren't overly costing revenue-generating activities so that sales is still bringing in more revenue base than what they're spending on non-revenue-based activities. The truth is that performance and resource costs therefore form two sides of the same coin. When we look at managing performance metrics, industry leaders are 2.2 times more likely than all others to be looking ahead to increase spend on integrating goals management data from rewards and recognition with resource spend information from workforce management, compensation, and payroll. They're looking to establish a workforce ROI in the sales organization that can be distilled down to the individual employee. Furthermore, they're looking to incorporate performance metrics in task management, goals achievement, and time and trends that go along with those achievement rates to understand how they map back against what it costs to keep the salesperson engaged and employed at the organization. Industry leaders are also 3.5 times more likely than all others to be expanding spend on internal training and development to combat rising turnover. We notice this particularly as the generational change is bringing new issues as to why employees join and stay with the organization. When we look at industry-leading sales organizations, just 40% of leaders are focusing on expanding performance data integrations to gain more insight into how their sales organizations are performing with respect to the cost of that performance. Meanwhile, they're 19% more likely than all others to be expanding training and development. Again, this does mirror expectations about what we know industry leaders have in terms of how they're viewing their sales organization. What it's missing is the fact that they're not necessarily thinking of cost and performance as going hand in hand. So industry leaders are about 20% more likely than all others to be expanding training and development, as we mentioned. Again, this does mirror those expectations that we know industry leaders have in terms of how they're viewing their sales organization. If you hone in on defining best practices and then push those best practices out to the sales organization, the idea is that yes, they'll have some downtime in terms of how they're learning and adopting those processes, but the results in terms of revenue generation and sales performance will outstrip those initial costs. So the reality is that there's a way to bring these two sides together to form just one side of the same coin. Sales performance needs to be measured against the resource outlays that it takes to achieve that performance. To do this, sales organizations need to remake the performance infrastructure that builds and defines top sales talent. They need to look at the ROI of expanding resource outlays for sales in the form of training, behavioral best practices, and performance incentives to determine which ones enhance bottom line revenue growth through the advancement of organizational improvements. They also need to take incoming performance data and map it against quantified pipeline performance to determine what optimal sales time and resource spend looks like relative to new and recurring revenue generation. In other words, they need to map performance data to resource outlays in sales to better understand what constitute a sales score that is good for the sales organization and good for the company's internal operations. With an understanding of the roadblocks facing sales organizations when it comes to defining top sales talent, let's look at what the solution space is doing to respond and contribute to the growth of this new solution infrastructure. Today's sales organizations separate talent acquisition and performance management much in the same way that the average organization does. What this means is that talent acquisition is focused on getting the right talent to the right place, but that the organization is often handicapped to understand both internal and external business drivers that affect the definition of top quality talent. In fact, industry leaders in sales alone are 3.5 times more likely than all other sales groups to admit that they don't build internal and external business drivers into their definition of top talent that ultimately lends to talent branding and hiring. While they're shifting course to remedy this, it still remains a problem. Looking at the way today's top sales organizations acquire talent, the top methods fall into two categories: outbound recruitment and inbound hiring. Within inbound hiring, industry leaders are also engaging in social recruitment to improve the likelihood that candidates will plug into the hiring process and engage the organization before they're even hired. Top performers are also engaging subject matter expert partners through RPO and staffing relationships to ensure that they can take advantage of all talent perspectives when it comes to defining and driving top quality talent acquisition. The main theme here is that industry leaders are shifting to listen to the talent market to better understand how top sales talent is plugging into the workplace. As they strive for more committed employees who will remain within the company longer and be motivated behind internal product developments, they're listening to external business pressures while measuring the internal ones. Within outbound recruitment, top sales organizations are focused on strong talent branding that gives a prospective salesperson an idea of what working at the company is like. Unlike traditional positional branding, though, sales talent branding can provide some idea of the compensation structure used by the company and what prospective employees might expect in terms of how financial performance might shape their relationship with their manager. In the applicant vetting process, industry leaders are also ensuring that they vet hard skills through assessments as they move to more social channels to measure and understand the impact of soft skills communications and social interactions. On the talent management side of things, managing sales performance hasn't seen a lot of change in the last few years. The top performance drivers in sales are still incentive-based and consist of management pushing resources out to the market without necessarily measuring how they're being consumed. Beyond resource deployment, industry leaders are improving internal communications and expanding skills development opportunities to engage in training best practices. Industry leaders themselves are 60% more likely than all others to be focused on developing both behavioral and procedural best practices within the sales organization. So unlike their counterparts, instead of just sitting back and relying on revenue figures to determine whether or not the sales organization is functioning, they're investing in getting smarter about how their sales personnel are getting smarter in and of themselves to promote those best practices and turn them into real results for both the people inside the sales group and the sales group itself. As the percent basis for functional use increases to 80% and above, talent management within industry-leading sales organizations follows the same theme of incentivized performance improvements. Again, this echoes what we talked about in the pressure section, that while industry-leading sales organizations recognize a major need to implement stronger performance metrics integrated with financial performance, the talent management infrastructure in place for them today is still a challenge for them when they go to include some of these newer metrics. Today, the talent management and talent acquisition arenas are separate. They don't communicate together, and often they have two different operational organizations managing them, with talent acquisition at times outsourced to an SME partner. While talent acquisition is taking a proactive approach toward assessing internal and external business drivers, the hiring is looking at how those pressures apply to candidates without equitably measuring the impact on the sales organization. Performance management data is currently limited in terms of what managers have, limiting the ability of new hire performance projections to link to the current state of the organization. Today, top sales organizations are therefore focused on building a score persona and investing in the resources that it'll take to take that persona to market to work for them. Some of the strongest investments they're making are linked to talent branding and the development of internal top sales performers, but they're really focusing on restructuring how their internal performance assessment and measurement solutions are bringing back non-revenue-based metrics to be able to convey out to the talent branding initiative to make sure that they're getting salespeople who will not only align with revenue goals, but align with the internal best practices of the organization. So today's industry-leading sales organizations do face mounting pressures from a lack of connection between talent acquisition and performance management. While they recognize that there's a strong need to connect them together, and they're certainly investing in that and investing in the technology space that's promoting their ability to bring performance management metrics together with talent acquisition for a stronger profile scoring mechanism, they're basically at the early stages of getting that infrastructure pulled together, despite recognizing that it needs to be there. Within performance management, they're quickly redefining how they determine top quality salespeople, but again, that infrastructure is lagging in terms of developing the metrics that they need. On the talent acquisition side, a lack of credible performance management definitions is leading to uncertainty for how incoming top talent should be measured to know if they'll succeed at the company. As industry leaders shift gears to respond to the challenges, they're linking together those performance incentive platforms that they offer with performance management to ensure that they can measure sales revenue generation against best practices and build a stronger definition of top sales performance relative to quota attainment and revenue generation. While today, from the technology perspective, this seems like a tall order, for industry leaders, the business results are beginning to show. In the first place, industry leaders are seeing sales performance align with greater achievement of management goals and objectives as they move to promote a stronger definition of what top sales performance looks like. What this means is that beyond the goals for revenue generation, salespeople are contributing field information that is helping internal development teams improve both the product and how it's delivered to market. Sales is also embarking on changing how they engage the market based on successes and failures across the entire organization. Where before salespeople were siloed behind their quotas, today at industry-leading companies, they're emerging to fill out an organization that develops and promotes smarter pipeline management and smarter results generation. At an individual level, industry leaders are also seeing performance improvements on the part of existing sales personnel. As sales managers move to create stronger definitions of top talent within their ranks, they're working those definitions into training and development efforts to measure and push the entire organization to improve. Finally, in the end, industry leaders are seeing revenue per FTE increase at a much faster pace than for all other organizations. Turns out that creating that top profile generating that top profile seems to really pay off. The final figure speaks volumes in that creating stronger performance-based definitions for top talent leads to smarter revenue generation through the employment of best practices across the entire sales organization. So when we look at what it means to really pull back and develop a stronger sense of sales profile, it's about measuring subjective non-revenue-based profile persona information with some of those revenue quota-based factors to understand how best practices are leading to stronger revenue generation and then pushing that out to the talent landscape. But don't necessarily just take our word for it here at Aberdeen. Let's hear from GrowthPlay moving forward to see how they're actually taking some of these ideas to market for an equitable performance scorecard.
Thanks, Zach. First, this is Dan Weinfurter. I am happy to be here with all of you today. So I thought I would talk a bit about the results from this study, provided some great insight, and connect those to what we see from our customers who really see the same challenges every day. If we had to pinpoint the top 5 that we hear most often, they would be, as you see here: the need to align the talent strategy to the changing organizational goals, the notion of finding and keeping the top performers, and then one that we think is critical, which I think the folks at Aberdeen talked a bit about, it's just defining what success looks like for individuals and teams, but in a very granular fashion, and then gain insight from these particular competencies and correlate them with performance data and do that going forward. We like the research. We think that industry leaders are really trying to get the talent strategy right because they have figured out, in some cases the easy way and in some cases the hard way, how it has such a significant impact on the bottom line. So if you want to sort of think about this and visualize the impact, take a look at some of these statistics, which unfortunately haven't really changed all that much over 30 years. We still see a version of the 80-20 rule that applies in most organizations. And if you think about the cost of every hire, it really is at least $1 million per salesperson. And if you think about the world of recurring revenue, what used to be a $1 million mistake is now often multiplied times the revenue multiplier that accretes value to the enterprise. So it may be somewhere between 5 and 10 times revenue, which means that a mistake of an individual sales contributor is a very expensive stake. So what's at stake if you get this right? You can improve the performance dramatically, and unfortunately the converse is also true. I think leaders are also aware of the fallout, though, that can be felt in areas that aren't so easily measured, which gets into some of what I would call the softer but equally important impact that you would see in an organization over time. This is a pretty interesting list. The damage is felt internally if there's turnover with colleagues, and certainly externally with customers, especially if it's a repetitive turnover scenario, which is often the case. There's lost momentum, there's disruption, there's constant turmoil and cost that comes from finding new people, getting them up to speed, integrating them into the team, and getting them productive. And certainly there's real risk to the employment brand, which is critical for the ongoing retention and recruitment of high quality people. So the bottom line here really is that hiring and promoting incorrectly is a very expensive business proposition. And that's really why we see best-in-class companies really, really working hard to get this right. So what the real true leaders in industry know about talent is this, really, that in the intermediate to long run, who you hire for your roles is really the only sustainable competitive advantage for any business. It's critical to get it right. We see, and this is a statistic that's really somewhat hard to believe, but the research would suggest it's true. If you get the talent part of your business right within a sales organization, you can double revenue without any incremental headcount. And assuming you have hired correctly, how you onboard, train, manage, and develop, and those sorts of things also certainly impact the success you own and you will receive as a business. Despite all this, though, many times sales leaders create the sales function without really thinking a lot about the structure, the roles, or even the people that they put in those roles. They often do what they have done before in a prior scenario, sort of thinking it worked for me before, it should work for me today, but they fail to recognize that no two companies are really the same, and that what worked perfectly in a previous life is no guarantee that it'll work in this new company at a different point in time. So here are the practices that we see in organizations that make talent a real priority. They know their talent and they can answer these essential questions. What are the key predictors? Really the difference makers as opposed to the table stakes that really determine success. And then thinking about, well, how do we ensure that the new hires that we bring on board really have these qualities? And how do we quickly get these people on board and up to speed so that they can meet their productivity goals? They really work hard to align sales talent with organizational strategy. In other words, the people that are at the point of sale are the key component in the execution of the business strategy. They take something as simple as growing by new customer acquisition versus new customers, and they think about, well, how does that impact the organizational structure that I need and the specific talent that fill those particular roles. And then finally, assuming they can get the right people on board, they really work hard to equip frontline managers with the appropriate processes, tools, and knowledge to develop, retain, and put in place a team of top performers. It sounds pretty easy, but in our view, getting the frontline managers to execute this process with the rigor and discipline is not easy or straightforward. the folks that are in frontline manager roles are busy, and while they know that there's a process that is in place and it exists and they should follow it, oftentimes people revert to behavior or just shortcut it, failing to recognize the cost of not getting it right. So let's talk a bit about finding A players and getting those folks into the right roles. So unlike what it used to be in the past, where there were relatively simple organizational structures, things have changed in a pretty meaningful way. My guess is that most of you on this call have multiple roles within your sales organization. Each of these roles may require and likely require different profiles, competencies, and behaviors that really define success in these roles. I think nearly everybody understands the differences between hunters and farmers. That's a pretty basic notion, and that some roles in a sales organization require more of a hunter and some require more of a farmer. But there are also many other distinct differences between transactional sales roles, consultative sales roles, and there are other things that really impact success in a particular sales role. So we see a list. This is by no means comprehensive, but the nature of the product or the service impacts in a pretty meaningful way the fit for the role, as does the size and the sophistication of the customers that they're calling on. Who they're calling on, i.e. the functional role of the prospect, also matters. For example, if you need a different competency profile if you're calling on IT versus HR or finance or marketing. They're different types of personalities, and often that will impact what the competency makeup of the successful seller is. One thing that also matters and is often overlooked is the stage that a company is in, i.e. an early stage or a business without a brand or reputation requires a far different type of person than a business that has a brand and a reputation. It's a far more daunting challenge, in our view, to have people who can come into an organization that's early stage and be successful. You need a true A player, or the outcome will be binary. Either they do really well or they do nothing at all. So in our view, and what we see from and hear from our leading customers, is that companies that make talent a real priority and get these nuances embedded in their hiring profiles tend to do better than those that don't. So another way that best-in-class companies make talent a priority is really by adopting a strategy that includes the right mindset, process, tools, and strategy and content to drive long-term success. So think about this as the right mindset will connect the dots between the ongoing talent initiatives and the overall strategy and organizational goals of your company. Let's take this notion just a wee bit farther. We see top companies creating a talent organization framework that helps them define the right structure and roles to execute against the business strategy, and then consistently identify what predicts success in each sales role. From that point, they try to determine if they have the right people in the right roles. It's really the overall strategic framework and the processes and tools within it that help these leading companies make more effective and more efficient talent decisions. Let's talk a little bit about the tools now that can help enable building a framework of this nature. So we are a big believer in the use of assessments. We always would say that your talent strategy should be both an art and a science. It's difficult to rely strictly on intuition and opinion to drive selection and development decisions. Even skilled interviewers really are not likely to be able to predict success for a role based on an interview. The research would suggest that there is a very low correlation, generally actually less than 25%, between interview predictions and actual job success. And there is an ample body of research that would suggest that interview processes can actually hurt in hiring decisions. And for example, the firm would have done better with blind selection procedures. At the end of this article, I have two articles that you might want to take a look at that highlight some of this research. One was in the Harvard Business Review in 2015, and the other one actually was in last Sunday's New York Times that talked about the limitations of interviews in actually making informed recruitment and hiring decisions. So as a result of all this, we feel that the use of predictive analytics is the science part of any effective talent strategy. Analytics give you the ability, really, to use data and analysis to inform a talent decision and to shed light on who you should hire and how. It's not the end-all, but data tends to trump opinion, or at the very least, it helps better inform the decision process so you end up with better results. We see really best-in-class companies using these kinds of tools to ensure alignment and then actually rigor and consistency in enabling talent strategy. So let me show you how talent analytics can be used to better inform decision making. So take a look at this little chart here. This view shows how a potential new hire stacks up in capability and potential against a current team of sales reps. So this is a good indication of how data actually informs a decision. The baseline data will help someone really predict the success in a given role. You can actually map an individual into a current team, or you can map up a current team and try to determine, do you have the talent in place at this particular time to execute the strategy that you have in place. You can define the gaps that you need to fill in order to cover critical shortages, and over time you can iterate this data to get better and better, really, and to correlate the specific competencies and behaviors that you have seen that over time actually correlate to performance. As we've mentioned a couple times now, getting talent right requires both art and science. And then the next slide actually talks a bit about how companies put these bits together. So in addition to what's measured by competency assessments, the resume remains really a critical piece of the puzzle. How did someone do before, and does that predict success in my company at this point in time? These certainly, this background information and reference checks are important. Unlike the article in the New York Times, we don't believe interviews are useless, but we do understand they have limitations. And they're an important part, done right, of an interview process. So the notion is to put these all together. Don't rely purely on assessment. Don't rely purely on an interview, but have a process that gives weighting to a variety of inputs so that you'll end up more likely than not to dramatically improve your probability of hiring correctly. So we see companies then driving impact by applying the insight that they gain through a recruitment process into the broader employee life cycle. They also create a notion of a cadence around various talent processes to turn insights into action. So what does this mean? Well, defining a cadence or an operating rhythm, if you want to use that word instead, around a talent process can enable your team and provide them the right tools to produce the kind of results that directly impact your bottom line. You can use what you've learned in an interview process for the performance management and the ongoing development of the person you've brought in to a critical role. Getting the talent right is, of course, an essential part of performance for any particular business, and I'd argue probably the most important part of sales performance over a period of time. However, it's not or, it's and other things that are part of a typical organization also do matter and matter quite a bit. So take a look at this graphic and think of it as a pipe of sorts, or a pipeline, or even a highway, which connects the talent strategy to equipping a person or a team for overall long-term success. When all of the dimensions of this pipe are aligned, all things being equal, I would think good things tend to happen and you get a high-performance team. However, if one dimension of the pipe is compromised, you will end up with suboptimal performance. So think of what happens, for example, a good way to visualize this is a 4-lane highway and they shut 1 lane for construction. It creates a big, big mess, even though you still have 3 lanes. And I think that's a good way to visualize this. We can see, really, from what we do, that best-in-class companies pay attention not just to who they hire and what background they have, but to all the other things that tend to drive performance over time. And talent is a critical part of this, but equipping that talent is also a requirement for success for any sales organization. Probably the most difficult job, in our view, in any company is the frontline sales manager. So we really see best-in-class companies focus a fair amount of time and attention on properly equipping their frontline sales managers with help, with processes, tools, and training that they need to diagnose and coach folks to higher levels of productivity, to put things in place that increase the retention of key talent, and try to get people up to speed quickly so that the risk of turnover in that critical period of time is mitigated. Great sales managers are required to constantly focus on many, many things. I mean, think about that job. It is very, very tough. And really trying to equip a sales team with a consistent operating cadence about how to prioritize the multiple roles will help them drive a much higher level of consistency and success amongst their team, and makes a very difficult job not easy, but at least achievable and doable. Sales talent, as I think everybody knows, is the ultimate driver of productivity. So we see best-in-class companies that make talent a priority, provide great coaching tools for frontline managers as well. There are many tools out in the market, but we have 2 things here that we just thought we'd highlight quickly that can provide, I think, help to improve the performance of individuals. The first one here is the skill-will coaching model, which really takes a look at someone's potential and capability and looks at performance data against that. So a common mistake that many sales managers make is to treat all salespeople the same. Sure most of us would agree that even if a company had a sales force of 100% millennials that were all of the same sex, all of these individuals are not the same, not at all. In fact, there's quite a bit of difference between each and every one of those individuals. So different motivations are at play, and different actions and methodologies and approaches will be required to maximize the performance and really help the individuals create opportunities for driving performance. So the skill-will model is a simple and effective tool for managers to use. Meet people where they are when they are defined, customized, and then implement combined and customized sales development actions that drive success. You won't be able to lead an effective sales organization if you don't have a way to easily enable frontline managers with tools to really help them coach their teams to success. Most of the research would suggest that coaching has a high ROI and is an essential component, maybe the most essential component in a frontline manager's tool bag to drive success of a particular sales team. If you want to improve sales productivity overall, you'll need to have a focus on how you are managing, coaching, and retaining sales talent. The coaching model is really a great tool to enable frontline managers to give reps feedback in a constant, consistent, repeatable fashion that helps improve performance of an individual or a team. If it's used correctly, in our view, it will provide clarity around what's expected of an individual, what's the task or job at hand, and then what tools do they have to really help do their job correctly. What are the resources that are available to each and every sales rep? The opportunity to do their best every day is what most people strive for, and providing feedback to individuals in a consistent and a productive, constructive fashion tends to correlate highly with results. And our view is that this model is a great way for frontline managers to deliver a clear, and consistent message and provide reps the coaching that they need to do really their best work each and every day, which tends to result in a motivated, engaged workforce. The last thing really that we see best-in-class companies do right is to choose the metrics that they watch and track them consistently. So there's metrics that are based on efficiency, effectiveness, and then there are metrics that are really based on outcomes. Many organizations also are big believers in managing inputs, and that certainly would be me amongst those. They're harder to capture, but they tend to be better predictors of performance as opposed to reporting out of performance, especially early in a person's tenure with a company. But that said, inputs and outputs are important. And both inputs and outputs can consist of efficiency measures, like how many, how much, at what cost, or what we call the effectiveness measures, which are how well, what's the close ratio, what's the impact on the business, the deal size, or the total revenue. The net of this is the key to successful talent management is the consistent tracking of actionable metrics at each stage in an employee's life cycle. And that's really what brings best-in-class companies the strategic results that can impact the bottom line. At this point, we're, I think, opening it up to questions, so I'll pass the baton back to Bennett here.
Thank you very much, Dan. And as Dan mentioned, we are going to jump into a quick Q&A. We've got a couple minutes left. So you can submit any questions you might have into the Q&A widget in the top left-hand side of your screen. So to start us off, actually, I do want to talk about the previous slide that was up there. So Dan, you talked a lot about collecting those metrics that matter, but data is one thing. How do you create an actionable plan based on your metrics?
Well, I think it's on a case-by-case basis using a consistent framework. So, I mean, it depends, I would think, on what the issue is. So let's say that a metric is how many sales calls per week, and that might be an important input metric that would determine success. If someone is having difficulty getting meetings, it could be that they're not making enough attempts to get meetings, or it could be that they're not doing the right things in a particular meeting, so as a result, a meeting isn't leading to subsequent meetings. And so a good frontline manager would diagnose that problem and then work with the particular individual to put a fix in place that's going to result in improvement in that particular metric.
All right, thank you, Dan. So Zach, early on we talked about this idea of scorecards and performer profiles. So Zach, how can I get recruiters and sales managers on board with a change of strategy towards a scorecard or top performer profile model?
Sure. So basically right now, we mentioned that the recruitment teams and the performance management teams in terms of the sales managers are really kind of siloed. But if they actually cross the aisle and start talking to each other, they're going to realize that they have a lot of operational benefits in common. That if they get the management objective from the top level to reduce labor costs and maintain some of that, start stabilizing some of those turnover issues, that they're going to be better off if they work together. So the first thing is really to bring their key stakeholders to the table, identify what the challenges are they have in common that can benefit each other, and start building towards a stronger organization. The ultimate benefit to each team is that getting the profile information together on a common scorecard, on a common, with a common set of analytics that tell them what top performers look like, it's going to make their job easier to go to market, get that top talent, and then cultivate it inside the organization.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to open up this last question to both of you, actually. So, Zach, you can start us off, but Dan, we'd still love to hear what you have to say about it. But the single biggest reason for salespeople to fail might be because they're not in the right role that they're hired to do. So how does a sales leader know that they're hiring the right person for the right role?
So that's actually a really great question. This is where it comes back to using those internal performance management metrics to identify not just your best performance overall for the organization, but taking it down to the individual performance level, and even going as far as to match, top performance characteristics to individual performance titles inside the organization. If you get those characteristics down and start to differentiate between either, departmental specifics or even position title specifics, you can start to get a better idea of when you have an incoming candidate coming in from your talent pool, that if these are the characteristics that they're most likely to identify with, then this might be a better role for them than necessarily what you were advertising for. If they're already inside the organization, you can do the same thing and try to move them and direct them through your own learning management system to developing into the role that they're better equipped for.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Zach. And with just a couple minutes left, I do want to field one more question. And Dan, I'm going to throw this one out to you. You talked a lot about key initiatives that are very important, but with all of these initiatives, where do you recommend somebody would start?
Well, I would start, it depends on the size of an organization and what's the objective. If it's an organization that's stable, it's one set of ideas, and if it's an organization that's going through rapid growth or there's a big change, then it's another. But I think in general, it's making sure that you have a very accurate and fact-based profile of each of the sales roles that you have in place, and understand what are the competencies that are predictive of success as opposed to descriptive of success, and making sure that there's understanding between the ones that are table stakes and the ones that are the difference makers. And then really trying to use the predictive analytics and knowledge of performance to better equip the team that you have, and also to inform hiring decisions going forward. If you really work hard to get the talent aligned to what each role is, you'll see results that improve dramatically over a reasonably short period of time.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan. Unfortunately, that's about all the time we have for today, everyone. I want to take a moment to thank Zach and Dan for sharing your research, insights, and recommendations with us all today. And thank you to our sponsor, GrowthPlay, for making this webinar possible. We hope you found today's broadcast to be beneficial, and if you have any final questions, you can submit them to our speakers. We have their contact information up on the screen, as well as in the bio widget. At the conclusion of the webinar, we do have a short survey about today's event. We'd love to hear any feedback that you have on our webinars, and we really appreciate your time. If you'd like to check out any future Aberdeen webinars, we encourage you to do so. You can find a webinar page featuring past and upcoming sessions by clicking the teal AG logo on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Thank you very much for your participation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.